Okay, hi everybody.
Hello.
Welcome back to Wandering into Wellness. Today we are joined by Brianna, who is an imagination coach, and she is joining us from LA, and we're super excited to have her. Welcome.
Hi.
So I actually found you through reading an article that you were involved in with Momotaro. And Momotaro do amazing products which I use for like vaginal wellness and like health and reproductive stuff, all using natural ingredients, and they're just like super cool. But they do these great interviews, and you did an amazing interview with them all about the intersection of sexuality and motherhood, and it just really impressed me because as a mom and as someone who's always felt like really comfortable in their sexuality, I've really identified with loads of the stuff that you were talking about in the article, and it really struck me that people just don't talk about motherhood and sexuality in the same sentence. It's so, we've just kind of cleaved them into two really comfortable separate boxes where we're going like, yeah, at nighttime in the bedroom, I might be sexual, definitely if my children are in a different place. And in the daytime, I'm in the mother role, and that's the way that I am. And it was so nice to see how fluid you were with that, and that you were actively trying to pursue bringing that into a kind of more normal sphere in media stuff. And so we were really excited to chat to you. And I guess I'd like to start off by asking you, when you were anticipating being a mother, when you were thinking about creating a family, was this something that you already really had in your head, that you were thinking, I really want to do this a little bit differently than what I'm seeing, or did that just evolve as stuff happened?
I think I definitely was at least aware of this separation that exists, at least maybe on a subconscious level. And I had some practice with redefining roles for myself, as my husband and I are in an open marriage, and for me, being a wife was something that was already really, really made me nervous in terms of like how I would have to adjust who I am or the way that I behaved now that I was occupying this new role. So I feel like going into motherhood, I was having a lot of the same feelings, but with a little more knowledge of like, oh, I actually have a little bit of power to redefine this as it fits me. So I don't know that I had like very particular ideas on what that would look like, but it was something that I did know was important. I didn't want to feel pressure to change the way that I dressed or behaved or spoke, because I was a mom, you know?
Yeah. And did you have like, in your own upbringing, was there elements of like, say, non-traditional aspects that you were kind of bringing forward, or were you designing this like from the ether?
No, my childhood was pretty typical, I'd say. And my mom, I come from a big Mexican family, and there's some shame around body stuff, which is really, it's not even sexuality necessarily, it's more like bodily functions. And so I was kind of taught not to be super open about what was going on with my body. It was something that we didn't really talk about. So I think that in part the way that I mother is a little bit of like a reaction to that, and wanting to create something new in my own home culture, and then also for them just to give them a different starting point, because I feel like for me I had to do a lot of catching up and a lot of like unlearning, and I'm like, how could I create a different household culture for them? Yeah.
And so being in an open marriage, did you have to decide or spend time thinking about like, how did motherhood fit into that template? Because that's also an unusual template, right?
Totally. We're still like kind of in the midst of that in some ways, because my oldest is only 3, and then we also dealt with the pandemic for a chunk of it. So in a lot of ways we're still navigating that. We're still navigating how that all fits together. You ready? I think how does it all fit together? Really, it's changed. It's mostly changed the types of relationships that I'm seeking. Because motherhood, as you know, is very demanding of time and energy. And so I've just found that the types of relationships that we are looking for tend to be on the more casual end, whereas before I had children, I enjoyed relationships that were a little more serious, for lack of better terms, or deeper emotional connections. Not that that's not possible. I think it's just we've just kind of swerved a little bit in the types of connections that we seek out.
Yeah.
And so, like, for your kids, do you think when they're 17, 18, are they going to grow up like, I don't know, I'm thinking like that Sex at Dawn book, which is amazing, which talks about this a lot in a lot of cultures, where they like have a village that raises a kid. Are you kind of on that sort of vein where they won't necessarily distinctly identify one major parent archetype and you'll have a multiple different personalities to influence? Is that the thing, or is that part of it?
I think that in an ideal world, like, that's interesting to me, but I'm finding that my husband and I like do still seek to like provide them with a little bit of normalcy. And then I think, not that that's not normal, but it is a little bit further on the scale of being more alternative. And actually, we live a little communally. We live with the same on the same property as our best friends. They live like 20 feet away in a back house. So we're kind of doing a little bit of that. And I joke with them a lot because we're non-monogamous, they're monogamous. And our relationship with them is not sexual at all, but it has a lot of like the same components of like these like poly communities where we do a lot of sharing, of caring for the children, and they just kind of go back and forth. And she won't let me wipe her nose, but she'll let Alex wipe her nose. So like there's a lot of these other features, even though our relationship with them is not sexual. So yeah, in a way we're doing that. There's kind of just like a grab bag of types of relationships, but mostly there's just a fluidity and an openness to the types of relationships that come into our lives, and not trying to put like a stop once they feel like past a point of intimacy that would be problematic potentially for other couples or more closed relationships.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this isn't really, I mean, it's a slight divergence to get into this, but it's just so interesting. Tell me about yourself and your partner and your attitudes to the relationship, and because we've talked a lot about like how relationships can be different,
poly versus monogamous stuff,
and what would they be like, and how would it be like to have that kind of version of trust, or bring in different things to like receptacles, and like, you know,
and when that would work versus when it wouldn't work. Like, say, in stressful times that you might revert to more normalcy, and then like in times where like things are good, there's lots of ripe abundant fruit around, then kind of people are thinking a bit more polyamorously about things. Like, do you have those types of thoughts about it? Like, is it like you constantly converse with your husband about how is that kind of where you're
going? Like, are you on the same page?
Yeah.
Like, were you both interested in it going into it? Do you feel like you're constantly having to come back, and like, do you have rituals around like creating a safe space where each week you talk about like, are we in the same place around this? What do we need to bring? Or has it just been really seamless?
It has not been seamless. and that's what pushed me into wanting to coach other folks who are desiring more imaginative relationship structures, is because there's so many easy mistakes to make. And my husband and I were not immune to that. As you're trying to do a bunch of unlearning and figuring out how to do things a new way where there's not like a clear template, it is very challenging. And for us, you know, we got together when we were 21 years old, which is so young, and
little babies.
So young. And, you know, I didn't expect to meet the person that I wanted to be, you know, life partners with at such a young age. That really surprised me. And I actually met him when I had just started thinking of myself as non-monogamous or as poly, which I'm still not sure if I'm poly or if I'm not. It's another story. But at the time I had just realized like, oh, I think that I'm a non-monogamous person. That makes more sense to me. So I was very open with him about that. I'm just like, hey, this is where I'm at. I think this might be what I need. This is what I need to at least explore right now. And we spent the few years of our relationship exploring it very slowly. It just would look like me like making out with somebody and then us kind of seeing how that felt. It was very slow. And you know, when you're in a new relationship, that new relationship energy is so potent that you can be, even if you're non-monogamous, I think you can be a little more content with the monogamy because of the potency of that energy. So it took a little bit of time for us to explore it a little more in depth. And Daniel, that's my partner's name, I've talked to him about this recently. I was like, do you think that you are non-monogamous, or do you think that it's something that you practice? Because there is a difference there. Some folks who identify as non-monogamous, they're like, no, it's a part of who I am, which is how I feel. I don't think that I could do monogamous relationships for a long period of time in any context. Whereas for him, what we landed on is, for him, it's more so he enjoys the philosophy of it and it makes sense to him. So he would be more content in a monogamous relationship, but he does like, now that we've been doing it and that we've dived a little bit deeper into like the reasons why, it's something that he believes in and enjoys for himself. So we've gotten on the same page with it, but it requires constant communication. Because as you know, you're both changing as individuals, your relationship shifting, factors in your life are shifting. These are all things that can shift your desires in your other relationships. Even who you meet can really shift your desires.
Specifically who you meet, right?
Yeah, specifically who you meet. But I mean, what I mean more by that is like, say I'm thinking that, you know, we're only seeking really casual connections right now. And, you know, I go out there and I go on a date with someone and you know, that's my intention. But then you meet someone and you only have, in my opinion, so much control over the type of connections that can grow. So, you know, even though might be going into it desiring a more casual connection, if I meet someone that just really inspires a deeper connection, then you got to communicate through that, you know.
It's what it is. And you've had that situation happen then, yeah?
Yeah, we have had that situation happen. I ended up in a 3-year relationship while Daniel and I were married. I had a boyfriend, and I did not, neither of us thought that would happen. So that was a big learning process and really great for us, inspired a lot of growth and deepening of our relationship, but it wasn't anything that either of us expected to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Go on.
So many
millions of questions.
I just keep thinking about my mother the whole time. I just keep thinking about like, if those were the choices that I made, how would my mother react? It's so funny that I mean, she lives in a different country, like, but it's just the thought that keeps coming up in my mind all the time, because since being a mother, you know, I think your relationship with your mother it changes because they have ways that they parented you, and then you might make different choices about the way that you parent your children, and they might see that as a reflection on how you think they did as a parent, or, you know, and vice versa. That might go back and forwards. And I'm just thinking, like, now that you're a mother, and then I don't know, is your mother still alive, or like, how does she feel about you being a mother? Like, did she know about you being non-monogamous first? How did she feel then? And has that changed now that you're a mother?
Yeah, we're not formally out to our families.
Okay.
We have siblings that we're close with that we talk very openly about it, but we're not formally out with our parents. For me, it's been a really slow process of kind of giving my parents more and more clues. And I think inviting them to ask questions if they want, like as they get these clues, like, all right, if they're ready for this, then they'll ask a little bit more, and if they're not, then they won't. And I think that that's kind of how we're handling it. I think like coming in super hot with like, all right guys, we're non-monogamous and this is the way it is, and if you don't like it, like, I just don't see that strategy being very effective. So
yeah. I'm just hoping they don't read the Momotaro blog or like watch one of your dwellings.
That's why I feel very open to them finding out. Like for me,
okay, yeah, cool. Well, you obviously, yeah,
not something to hide or something that like I need to be ashamed of. It's something that is a part of me, and you know, I'm really fine with the possibility of my mom finding, you know, the blog and reading it and then approaching me about it. I'm actually very excited to have that conversation with her. I just don't want to do it until I feel like she's ready, because I can see that, as you're imagining with your mother, like I can see it like not going perfectly. So
down in some set of flames, maybe, perhaps. I don't know, just thoughts. So we spoke about your relationship to your mother and your polyamory. What about your relationship to yourself and your sexuality and becoming a mother, and your you know, your identity in yourself and polyamory? Did that shift when you became a parent? Did you want to protect like a tighter unit, or did that change at all, or did you maintain that kind of fluidity in your identity, like sexually, throughout?
Mostly because of logistics, it shifted a little bit. I think that I didn't have, you know, before you become a mom, you think you have a concept of it, but in reality, like there's no way to have like a real concept of it unless you've like lived very closely with another mother and like seen it all. It's just really hard to like actually imagine. So mostly because of just sheer logistics and time, I dated less. I have been dating less since I've been a mom, but it's not because I want to be dating less necessarily. Well, I guess that was actually a surprise too, is like how much I enjoy being home with my kids, and how like my husband's actually been dating more since I became a mother than I have, because I find that like with nursing so much and loving nursing and like just really seeing the benefit of being like with them physically, it's just actually shifted my desires a little bit, where I've come home early from dates. Like I'm sorry, I gotta go home. I miss my
Slightly
babies,
exhausted.
you know?
Yeah.
I miss my babies. So
Nice.
but I feel really like okay with that in this season, just knowing that that'll shift again. Because my children she's 15 months, and then, oh, are you kicking? Don't knock the table down. And then our oldest is 3, so they're still very young.
And tell me, I remember when I was breastfeeding my little guy, and we had a challenging breastfeeding journey. So like many nights I was sitting up feeding him in the middle of the night, like on my phone, trying to stay awake whilst sitting up. And I remember coming across an article where some kind of Instagram person had commented that they were feeding their kid, like, you know how some people feed lying down in bed at night, that beautiful thing that I was never able to do, but looks really cozy. And that she was feeding them, and then her husband like approached her to have sex, and they started having sex, and the baby was still feeding at the time. And the article was about the responses to that post, and like how vehemently anti basically every single person who ever saw the post was about it. And I remember being so shocked, like it just wasn't there for me at my time in my life to be having sex and breastfeeding at the same time, because the breastfeeding was just so tricky. It just couldn't have happened. It just would have been impossible. But I wouldn't have been opposed. It didn't repulse me, the idea, like it definitely didn't shock me. I was like, oh yeah, I can see how that would happen, right? But everybody who had read this article or seen this post was like profoundly shocked that this woman would have been breastfeeding her baby and having sex at the same time. And it was amazing for me. But everyone I talked to going like, do you feel that way? Everyone was like, no way would I do that. God. And so I just like, it seemed like reading your article, I was like, okay, so it seems like she's actually talking about this thing where it doesn't have to be like mother and sexual, but not at the same time. There's just like how, like our breasts are these sexual things, right? But then when you're breastfeeding, the actual act of the breastfeeding isn't like sexual feeling, but that doesn't mean your breast can't also be sexual. Like, why do they have to be separate things at the same time, you know?
Yeah, I remember that as well. That was I'm pretty sure that was before I was a mother. I think that was a model. She was a model as well, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, for me, I think there's a few pieces to why it makes people so uncomfortable. I think one, as we've touched on before, just that people like really need these identities to be separate, you know, of like mother and whore, and like you can't be both at the same time. I think people just really struggle with that, and I think that has to do with just how much power there is in both of those roles. There's so much power in the role of mother and like your ability to nurture and to bring life. But there's also a very different power in a woman's sexuality. And I think that we're able to recognize those two powers and those two roles as like as being so powerful, but putting them together is just, oh my goodness, like seeing a woman in her full power as sexual being, but also mother, and like it's a lot. It's a lot for people to handle, I think, is the first part of it. The second part of it, I think, is that we're still very uncomfortable with our own sexualities. There still is a lot of shame just around sexuality in general. And I think owning that sexuality around your children is very challenging, because we have this desire, I think, to protect them. And I think that we accidentally overcompensate. And instead of learning how to interact with our sexuality in an appropriate and healthy way in front of our children, is very scary. And it feels like we're crossing lines or doing something wrong. But we rob ourselves of the opportunity to teach them what a healthy sexuality looks like.
Yeah, exactly that. That's really the key point, isn't it? It's like when you go back to like the Salem witch trials, it feels like that's basically, it's like that kind of significant power of femininity that we know we can't, because there's, you know, with men, it's a really different thing. Like a man and a baby, like there've been like posters in the 80s and 90s of like topless men holding babies. Women are looking, they're going, that's, or I don't know, maybe those are designed by men, but I don't know, coke ad, whatever, but they're like it's a sexual image of a man holding a baby. That's cool.
Yeah.
But it seems like once it's crossing over into like the ability of a mum to, like you say, give life, feed her baby, and pleasure herself or have sex at the same time, it's like, is it confusion? Is the revulsion as a result of confusion? And is the confusion just a lack of templating? Is that what's going on?
That's a good question.
Like if we just saw it more, would it just not be confusing? Is it just the case that
I think in part, yes. And I think we are seeing more of it. And I touched in my article on Momotaro, like how there are female celebrities that have done a little bit of work, mostly women of color, but to push that line a little bit. Cardi B was breastfeeding in her music video. But yeah, I think we do need to see it more. And that's why I try, and I didn't want to change the way that I acted out in the world once I became a mother, because I did want to provide more examples. I remember even while pregnant, people have a hard time with it. Even before the baby comes out of your body, you know, people see you're a mother, but like they don't want to see your body as sexual as well, even though you're like, how do you think I got pregnant?
Yeah.
It's so funny. But
it's like your stock phrase.
I remember I was at the grocery store one time, and it was a warm day. I was wearing like a crop top with my pregnant belly out, and like, I don't know, a skirt. But you know, I'm not gonna go naked to the grocery store, but my pregnant belly was out. It was a hot day. I didn't see a problem with it. And there was a man in the grocery store that was just like so bothered by my belly being out, and he just like looked at me with so much like emotion on his face, and he was like, nice belly. And I was
Whoa, Heavy?
You were like, yes, it is. Thank you.
Yeah, like but it was interesting because his reaction was so visceral. And I think that like he wasn't even really conscious of like why he was having that reaction or like what was happening. He just saw like, oh, pregnant belly. Maybe I'm finding this woman attractive too, and I don't know what to do, and I'm like short circuiting here.
Yeah, literally that.
It's funny though, isn't it? Because I think like, so we have this notion of like, I feel like if you had a discussion with like, you're like, say we just took all the neighbors, like the 5 houses randomly around here, and just like had a conversation around like, how would you feel about like having sex in a bedroom where your kids were also sleeping at the same time? The average person would be like, no, like there's no way that I'm going to do that with my kid in a room. Like, no way. Whereas we also would then like go to India and accept that most families sleep in a 1-room situation, maybe a 1-bed situation, and there's lots of kids, so they're having a lot of sex because those kids are happening, and that's definitely happening in the same situation as all those kids. And we're not even like consciously thinking like shame on them, you know.
But I think sorry, go on.
No,
with the Indian thing, it's really specific, because when you go to Indian culture, everything is decidedly public. Their shit is public. Their emotions are public. They're really like, the men hold each other's hands, like all of the like everything about their emotional lives. There doesn't seem to be a privacy thing there. And I think maybe it's that privacy thing that we've drawn down all these veils in Western life. There's just this tangled web of like what can be shown, and then when you start to show small bits but not all of it, we know what that does to people. It's like when you show a man in 19th century England a woman's ankle, he starts to like lose his mind, you know. But it's like, if you show the whole thing, then you like get to make your mind up about the whole thing. Do you like it? Why do you like it? All that stuff. I don't know. It's a curiosity. But tell me this. So your own sexuality, like, is in your sexual relationship with yourself. Did you feel, because this is something you've talked about a little bit as well, like, and a lot of mothers you hear talk about, that they didn't feel like having sex, or they didn't feel sexual around when they were a mum initially? And is that something, did you have that same thing? Was that transition a shorter transition, or did you ever feel like non-sexual?
Yeah, I'm a very sexual person, and I think for me that never went away. even throughout my pregnancy, I you know, with my first pregnancy especially, my libido was, to be frank, like terrifying. I felt like I was a danger to society. It was like, this feels a little, you know, abnormal, but it's not. You know, pregnancy affects libido for women one way or the other. And for me, with my first pregnancy, it was just like way up, and pretty average after I had the baby. And then for my second pregnancy, I was kind of ready for it to be wild again, but it actually didn't get as wild that second time around. It was more just steady. I don't know if this is true, but what I've heard is when you're pregnant with a boy, that their little bit of testosterone can really kick up your libido. And I don't know, my first one was a boy and my second one was a girl, so I don't know if that like that.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I was the same. Yeah, I had a boy and I was the same. Like, I was just felt super sexual through my whole pregnancy, like the whole time, like it didn't go away at all. So maybe that is true, the boy thing. And I think like I felt sexual really quickly after giving birth, but then the tiredness, because Ruben was such a terrible sleeper, the tiredness kicked into such an extreme point that there was just nothing, like I was just in survival mode then. So I think like when you're in that point of extreme depletion, you're not like going woohoo, spend the extra energy somewhere. Now, knowing about like Taoist practices and all these things that we've explored recently, like it would have been a nice thing to bring energy back into the body, like to have that thing. But I think it's so common to fall into that pattern of exhaustion, the same tropes of motherhood, never having sex, then stopping wanting sex, and those things just kind of, it just becomes this like void thing. And I think that's what was so exciting to read your article, was to think about like how, you know, just blue sky thinking, imagining like, how would it be if we were talking to mothers in preparation for pregnancy and birth, and sexuality was like a part of that conversation, and like, and how are you going to handle that, and what are your practices going to look like, and have you talked to your partner about like what sex is going to be like, and what are you comfortable with, and like, do you have fixed ideas about what I look like as a mother, and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think totally that's something that's a big piece that's missing. I think especially with partnered mothers who are partnered, like that conversation, it feels so essential, but we're not encouraged to have it. And then I think people just get kind of blindsided by either, the turn one way or another of just like this high crazy libido, as my husband was like, whoa, or like, not wanting it at all. And I think even women have a hard time anticipating, this makes sense. Like when your body changes so rapidly and so quickly, like how are you going to feel about it? Are you going to love it? And is it going to make you feel sexier? Or are you going to hate it? And is it going to make you feel like you want to hide it away? It's almost impossible to know. And then even throughout your pregnancy, you can, go back and forth depending on the day, and from pregnancy to pregnancy, it's also different. So unpredictable, but those conversations definitely need to be happening more.
Yeah. I think also there's a piece around like self-pleasuring stuff, because I think, and like we've talked about this lots and a little bit we've touched on it in the podcast, like how my experience, and I came from a family that were really open sexually, so I was really lucky that they were really good about, my mom was really open to talk to us about that kind of stuff, but self-pleasure was not talked about in terms of the girls in the family. Like the guys, everyone knew that the guys masturbated in school, everyone was talking about masturbation and the guys in porn and that kind of stuff, but none of the girls ever talked about it. Like it just wasn't a thing. And I wonder if like, because a natural way to come back into your sexuality once you're a mother would be to self-pleasure and to learn again, because everything changes. That's the other thing, isn't it? Like depending on the birth you've had, stuff can look really different down there, it can feel really different down there, and maybe you're not ready to relate to your partner or to someone else when you haven't relearned to connect with like, what do I like now post having a baby? Do I like it differently? And that connection with yourself is really, really important. But I think that teaching pregnancy yoga, women still are so uncomfortable to even do the perineal massage. They're like, oh, I don't even, no thank you, so then we're saying like, well, how can you, like, I really think that you should build yourself exactly build your self pleasure practice so you know what you like, and maybe that's a part of the conversation that's missing too.
Oh, for sure. I was going to bring that up earlier and I forgot, but self pleasure is a huge part of my personal practice. Like I've always been someone who enjoys masturbating, ideally once a day, honestly. Like it's just like a really it helps me to stay in my body. There's just so many benefits to it. And I definitely returned to that, as soon as I could, which like, after having a baby, it is a little, you're nervous
super tricky.
I don't know what's going on down there and I'm not sure I want to know yet. Like it can take a few weeks, but
probably a great way to get to know how you're healing though, genuinely.
Well, a great way, as Lydia touched on before, I think like relearning your body is just kind of huge. Like I think that it took a really long time for me to be able to have a partnered orgasm postpartum, even though it was really easy for me beforehand. And I think that masturbating really helped me to like relearn, like, okay, well, I don't get to it the same way. So how do I, incorporating even new toys that I didn't have before, like how do I get there? How do I do that? Because it wasn't the same, that was for sure, because everything moves around.
But
I think,
and how was that with your partner in terms of them getting to, did that knock anyone's confidence? Was everybody cool in the gang?
I think that it's natural for men to feel a way about that and feel like it has something to do with them. But I think like being very reassuring and even explicit, I'm just like, dude, everything moved around. It's not, not like, don't take this personal. Like it's, we're learning again. And then I mean, then it provided opportunity for like this really big celebratory moment when like it happened. I'm just like, like we did it again. Like we were able to make that happen. This is so exciting. And yeah, I mean, I think another thing is like going back to like imagination too. I think when I coach couples, I've coached a couple that was bringing a child into the world, a hetero couple, and we talked a lot about just expectations around sexuality. But I think something to add is like just having a broader imagination around like what sex can be is also very important. That sex is so much more than like penetration, you know, and even thinking about bringing in some like kink or kinky practices into the bedroom during that time. It's not the first thing that comes to mind, but it actually is really helpful in terms of like imagination. Like what are other intimate sexual practices that we can play with that are that maybe feel better for you as you're pregnant or as we're exhausted or as you're a new mother.
And particularly in that moment, you're probably more like aligned with the idea of beating a familiar path back to what you know, as opposed to going like, I have to like start from scratch and like don't tell me to reimagine. I can't reimagine my diet. Don't tell me to reimagine sex.
That's true. But I think more so kind of taking it slower and just realizing that there can be a lot of intimacy and sexual energy in like a foot massage. You know, or just worshiping one part of the body, you know, belly worship, like how much, if we just spend a lot of time here, like what can we cultivate together that doesn't put so much pressure on like doing things the way we used to do them, on like taking that same path towards like penetrative sex. Yeah, there are lots of options.
So just in terms of your partner, we're talking like sex and motherhood is kind of, but that's our topic here today. But like, just like talk about sex and fatherhood for a second. Like, was he as on board as you were in terms of how closely you could bring the roles of mother and like sexually active woman? Like, what's your, like, how did that go? Was that a conversation that went to like predictably, or were there differences there?
I think, you know, my partner's on his own journey with his sexuality. And I think overall, he doesn't necessarily think of his sexuality as like as big of a piece of who he is. Whereas for me, my sexuality is just more essential to who I am in a bigger way. And that's just a bigger piece of the pie. But it's actually been fun to have conversations as they come up, even around like, you know, our kids are little, and you know, Daniel and I we like being naked. We're not, I guess maybe we are nudists. I haven't like really been like, but you know, nudity around the house is something that's like very comfortable for us. And like as the children get older, it's something that it's just mostly a lot of questions are coming up, and I think like it feels, male sexuality can feel more threatening for very real reasons. And I find sometimes that I've even internalized that, which is interesting. So I think it's something that we're still working through. Like, how does that fit with fatherhood, with being a male bodied person? Like, how do you parent sex positively as a male bodied person is, I think, a huge, we have not touched that. Like, and I, Daniel and I are very excited to work that out, but in, you know, we're just traversing a lot of new terrain, and it's tricky, and it's, yeah, as I said before, I don't know that I answered your question, but just mostly it's a lot of question marks and a lot of like discussing things as they come up of like, oh, I noticed this thing happened, and like I felt, you know, a reaction here, and like let's talk through that. Like that, you know, that's either not how I wanted to feel, or like how can we do that differently, or like what resources are out there. Yeah,
I think it's really interesting, and like you said, it's constantly shifting. Like we'd be the same at home in my house like would be really comfortable being naked like all the time. My son's naked, we're all naked, like that's just the way that is. And so he's really comfortable around bodies, and like there isn't really a boundary. I mean, like obviously we talk about consent and those kinds of things, but like he's touching my body, and we have baths together, we sleep in the same bed together, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And it's interesting, like through the ages from 3, 4, 5, 6, now 6.5, nearly 7, how that starts to, how you navigate that, and how like I find that old patterning, you know, I find myself like in the bath and then he's like trying to touch my vulva, or like, what that bit's hairy, mommy, like what's that? I really want to touch it, mommy, I just really want to touch it, can I touch it? And I'm finding myself like reflex, no, and then like in my head, and then realizing I've been silent too long, and like, oh, I don't want there to be shame, like what am I going to say, and then like spinning out of my head of trying to go like, is this because I feel like no, that's wrong, or is it because someone's told me it's wrong, or is it because I really feel that that's wrong? Like how do I navigate those things? And I think those things are constantly coming up. It sounds really nice that you have that relationship with your partner where you're able to like bring that stuff to the table in real time and go like, so this happened, like how do we feel about this thing? And I think it's really hard to not, you don't have, sorry.
You there? Yeah, you're there. Sorry about that.
Things, sorry. You don't have all the answers up front, and there are constantly new situations that evolve that you're not anticipating around sexuality and your feelings around it. And I think it's like, it's so nice and refreshing to talk to someone who feels similarly. And I feel like if we had more people openly having these discussions, like I certainly would feel like it would be so nice to be able to go like, hey, this thing happened, like you're ahead of me, or you're like, how did you navigate that thing? And then there just isn't templates for it, because I know when Ruben used to touch my nipples all the time until this year, like constantly. And I would tell my friends like, well, he's always touching my nipples, and like it's starting to get sore, and like I don't know how I feel about it. And then they would be like, just tell him to stop touching your nipples. And I was like, well, that doesn't feel natural either, because he's seeking some kind of comfort, and that's comfortable for me that he's seeking the comfort. But it's also the boundary of like when it becomes sore, and like I don't know, you know, it's these stuff are hard to navigate.
It is. It's very hard to navigate. And something that's actually interesting that's happened, you're talking about touching nipples, and we talked about like my husband and his journey as a parent. And something that happened for us is because I had my babies very close together, we didn't exactly mean to do that, but that's how it happened. My oldest, he kind of got the boot a little bit from my body, having access to my body as much a little earlier than I would have preferred. But that's the way it had to go, you know, when she came. And what happened is he actually got really attached to my husband's body, and he actually uses Daniel's nipples for comfort. He rubs his nipples, and so Daniel's actually had to do the bulk of navigating this conversation that we're having, because he's having to teach our kid about consent. That's like having to be a conversation that he's having, and he's having to navigate like, okay, my nipples are sore, so how do I communicate that to our 3-year-old in a way that he can, you know, work with.
Yeah,
that's amazing to have a man navigating that, isn't this great?
Ruben does the same thing. Like as soon as I started to pull away and go, it's actually getting really sore for me, he just went straight on to his dad and started playing with his nipples too. And now he's just started to self-soothe with his own nipples.
Okay.
So he's transferred it to himself now. So like he'll be upset and he'll just put his hand on his top, and he calls it boobying, but like he'll just be just like boobying away, and that's the way that is. And it's fascinating to watch it, but it's also it's fascinating to see how uncomfortable it makes people, though. That's the other thing.
And my partner's really wrestling with it himself. I see him, and we talk about it. But you know, in the pandemic, it was a habit that developed because we were just home. But then once we're out in public and my 3-year-old son is starting to put his hands, you know, down my husband's shirt, it's been interesting to watch him navigate that of like, oh, like, am I comfortable with other people seeing this? And if so, if not, like, why? And so that's been it's brought up already like some fun conversations. And
it feels like you need to have like a series of t-shirts made so that you can present your arguments to the world in like bite-sized form, so you don't have to have conversations everywhere you go to like navigate these things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, like how even that act, which is like very decidedly like not sexual,
Benign.
brings up still things for folks, like observing a 3-year-old male-bodied child rubbing his male-bodied parents' nipples like that. That's like really challenging for people.
That's triggering. That's weird. I wouldn't even think that. It's
But
amazing.
really, it's just this very like primal, really, like this very primal act that's happening, that is really beautiful and intimate, and yeah.
Cool. A nipple's a nipple, essentially, in this situation.
That's what we learned.
I know, but also like soothers, or but I don't know what you call it there, like dummies or doties we call it here. I mean, they're just nipples, like, and we buy them, like transplant nipples, and just give them to our kids, and they play with them, and they have them till they're like, some kids have them till they're 6 or 7, and we're like, that's fine, it's just a fake nipple replacement, and we're cool with that. But like, touch your own nipple and Jesus Christ,
it's not a real one.
How dare you? It's so I know, it's interesting. I wanted to know, because on your Instagram page, like, you've been navigating, taking really beautiful photographs that explain or like tread the line of trying to marry, here I am, I'm sexual, here I am, I'm also mothering at the same time. Do you get a lot of pushback on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is my 3rd Instagram account because Instagram has deleted my account twice.
Wow.
And I can't understand why that would be, minus, that I'm challenging a lot of these norms. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't got a lot of pushback like through like personal messages or anything, which is really nice. I prefer that.
Yeah,
no hate mail. That's great. So I wouldn't say that I've had a lot of pushback, minus like Instagram not liking it. And
tell us about that content and the purpose of that content. What were you trying to like elucidate, or were you trying to elicit a response?
I think that I was just wanting more visibility for mothers who are sexual, who are very comfortable in their sexuality, who like feeling sexy, as they're moving through the world, and like don't shift that just because they have a baby on them. I just realized that I didn't have a lot of in my head, images or examples of that as I was becoming a mom. But I was often like prancing around the house in lingerie, as I was caring for my babies. So I just realized that I wanted to create more images for women to relate to. And then even as a brown-skinned woman, or as a petite woman, like there's these it's really nice to see people that look like you. There's really something to that. And like when we think about the body positive movement, how like just anytime you see this body that reminds you of yourself, like how powerful that is. And so I just wanted to add to that, just wanted to add to that with my body.
Yeah. And do you think there is a thing, isn't there, around like our notion of what makes a mother, and like good mother versus bad mother? And I think the sexuality thing definitely falls in there as well, doesn't it? Because I think that we have these really inbuilt notions of, like, I have these memories, and I don't even know where they're from, but I remember like walking down the street and seeing like a younger mother dressed kind of sexy with a baby, and the feeling, I don't know whether I was being told it, whether I heard it, whether other people in the street did it, but having the notion of like, God, that's inappropriate. Like, why is she dressed like that with her child? And I really feel that in my body. And it's not something that I would think when I'm looking at them, but I remember that. And that is a thing. I think we have this real, like, we're totally happy for women to dress sexy and go out to clubs and dates and whatever until they have a baby. And then suddenly it's like, what? Who does she think she is? With her sexy. Yeah. Who does she think she is being sexy? She's got a baby at home. Like, that's sending like an inappropriate message to her child. Is it like that?
Is there promiscuity?
I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, the first answer that comes to mind is just like the patriarchy and men wanting to control women's bodies, and just like this idea of like, oh, she has a man presumably, and why is she dressed in this way to attract other mates when she's already done it? So that's the first thing that comes to mind. I don't know, I think it's a lot of things. Once again, like, thankfully I haven't really had to face anything super negative with that either. Like, I think like people have mostly complimented my appearance when I look good and I'm out with my babies, just like, oh, you're such a hot mom. People will say that. It's like, thanks.
Good. I feel like maybe you come to good old Catholic Ireland, it might like go slightly differently over here. Am I right? I think we might be just a smidge more conservative.
It's weird as well, though, isn't it, that we even have to quantify it, though? Like, my initial response to that is like, it's super nice that they said that, but it's a shame that it's like, why can't you just be a hot woman? Like, how come you have to even have mum in that sentence? Like, it's like when they say, like, you're really good looking for a 39-year-old, and you're like, thanks, that feels super. Just properly just like, I don't know. Yeah, it's a weird. And then an interesting other aspect to it, which is kind of left field, but just occurred to me then, like, I used to work as a nanny for years, and like a super nanny and different things, and so I was much younger then, you know, like I would have been in my early 20s, and I found that when I was a nanny, like when I wasn't the baby's parent and I was pushing a baby in a buggy along the street, I would get loads of attention from guys, like loads, and dads and people going and like finding me attractive and saying that I was attractive and wanting to come and chat to me. And then when I had my own baby and I was walking along the street, it was like, that wasn't sexy. So there was like the nanny with the baby, that's a sexy thing, right? That's a trope that we know all the time. The guys find the nanny sexy, but the actual mum with the buggy, that's like, she seems harried, she's probably a bit naggy, she's a bit, you know, slumpy. Like, why? What? It's the same thing. Yeah, it's the same just a woman with a baby in a buggy. Like, what's that about? It's
problematic, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, I feel like I have to apologize on behalf of men here. The male gaze is a lot to respond to, isn't it? Or a lot to answer for. It's like we're kind of caught in a bit of an awful middle ground as well, because if men are going to continue to be part of the conversation, we have to continue to express our sexuality. And if our sexuality has got a maleness to it, it's going to continue to like slip into this kind of like slightly dark place. We have to like somehow have it in the light and not allow it to, I don't know, it's just like the less it's talked about or the less it's allowed to be talked about, you feel like the more it subverts. It's like this awful thing where we put gagging orders on people about certain words and certain phrases. It just internalizes the same thought process, drives them deeper, makes them darker. It's just a really tricky thing to keep men in this conversation as opposed to going like, what the fuck, stop commenting, you know?
Yeah. And I feel like that's really sexuality in general, and that thought applies kind of across the board to everything we've been talking about. It's just like, the more we try to hide the fact that like mothers have sexualities, that children have sexualities, that parents have needs that need to be met. They still need to connect sexually once they're parents. Like, the more that we just like don't talk about these things and push them down,
that's where the problems start. Yeah, exactly.
Nothing good will come of that.
That's where the problems start. And like, I even think about the way that, you know, we're trying to imagine this like post Me Too world, where and I know we focus mostly on like hetero interactions, but how do we heal the way that men and women interact sexually, and like how do we interact with each other's sexualities in a way that feels healthy? And I think that we've really overcompensated. And it's just like, oh, well, we just need to like be super careful and not talk about it and pretend like we don't even have sexualities, and then go very slow and tread lightly when like, maybe the answer is different.
Yeah. Agreed. Fully agreed. Lovely.
It's totally true.
Thank you so much for giving us so much of your time. You're busy momming and having all the thoughts. So it's amazing to really be able to engage with somebody who has this, you know, this potential for reimagining their own lives and the potential to educate others. It's great. It's been really, really inspiring and really like.
It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thanks.
So that's great.
So good.
What's going on?
That wouldn't have happened with my kid. That wouldn't have happened. He would have done all the talking. Oh my God. But I was thinking, it'd be fun to like revisit this conversation in a couple of years when your kids are a little bit older and like see what the questions have come up, and I wonder, like, it'll be just so interesting to continue that conversation.
I'm really trying to get ahead of it because it happens quickly, but
yeah,
we'll
sure.
Yeah, it's like overnight.
I'm
telling you.
Cool.
Oh, Brianna, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Yeah, thank you guys. It was great.
And if people want to get in touch with you, to work with you as an imagination coach, where's the best way that they can find you?
Emailing me is best. I do have a website. It's bayleche.com.
Okay.
You can also find me on Instagram. Unfortunately, there's a very annoying underscore at the end of Bayleche since it's my third account. But you can check out my work on Instagram, and if it appeals to you, check out my website, bayleche.com. And there's lots of options for how to work with me.
Cool.
Okay,
nice
lovely.
One. Okay, well, it just remains for us to thank our sponsors, Newsdesk Nutrition, who are fantastic plant-powered protein and nutrition partners, and also to thank Clearlight Saunas for those of you who want to put a little hot box in your garden and have a nice infrared sauna to improve your life. Come and talk to us about that. We'll get you guys some discount codes. And thank you so much, Brianna, because you've been absolutely a legend, and really, like, we were so giddy to have this conversation, you can't imagine. So it's been everything we wanted. So thank you for that.
Yay.
Thank you so much.
Nice one.
Yay.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.